Hello everyone, this is Randall Lim. In this video, I would like to introduce to you the Japanese martial disciplines. Now this is going to be quite a long video. So if in any point in time when you would like to pause or stop the video, please do so. But please remember exactly where you left off. Right, Japanese martial disciplines. But what is the Japanese martial disciplines? It is a Japanese approach to military, combat, or defense. It's actually embraced by both the ancient warriors as well as modern days enthusiasts like me. Right, the ancient warriors would practice it every day. Not only do they practice the techniques, the martial techniques, they are also educated in literature, philosophy, etiquette, and ethics. Right? They do this as a way to prepare for the battlefield. Because in ancient Japan, during the civil wars, they need to be ready at any time when called upon. The Japanese warriors, these warriors call themselves bushi, or in kanji, old Chinese characters, it looks like this, bushi. It simply means the martial person. However, the Japanese warriors never called themselves samurai, because the word samurai means the servant. The servant to original lord called the daimyo. So in medieval Japan, ancient Japan, the samurais were never called samurais. They called themselves bushi. Now, these warriors existed as private regional soldiers as early as the year 700 AD. 700 AD is called the Heian Jidai, Heian era, or the Heian period. Right. Just to let you know, George Lucas was inspired by the word Jedi for his Star Wars movies. That's where the name Jedi came from. It came from Jedi, period. However, although there were warriors as early as the 700s, there was still no warrior class. Warrior class is just a social status. As a social status, the warrior class began only in the 1100s. In 1100s, during the Kamakura Jidai, the Kamakura period. And this warrior class lasted until the 1800s. That would be the Meiji Jidai, the Meiji period. What happened during the Meiji period? The emperor took over absolute power over the shogun. The shogun is the top warrior leader. All right, and then once the emperor took over the power over the shogun, he allowed Japan to be westernized and allowed Western influence and Western traders into Japan. This revolution is called the Meiji Restoration, restoring power back to the emperor. Meiji, in kanji, in old Chinese characters, it looks like this, Meiji. It also resulted in the end of the warrior class. Right. samurais or the bushi would have to cut off their long hair. At this time, they would be forced to cut off. Martial mean, what does the word martial mean? But any discipline that's associated with military is described as bu, or in old Chinese character or kanji, it looks like this, bu, meaning military, martial, or to stop the spear. Now, if you look at this character, there are two parts to it. Under the shelter, so to speak, it means to stop. And the shelter itself means spear. So bu can also be seen as to stop the spear. Perhaps to stop the spear may have two possible implications. One is to defend from an attack. Another possible explanation would be to prevent an attack from happening in the very first place. This is bu. Classification of martial disciplines. Now, Japanese martial disciplines can generally be classified into two main groups. One is Bujitsu. The other would be Budo. And here are the kanji, Bujitsu and Budo. Jitsu. What does Jitsu mean? Now, there is actually no standardized Romanized spelling for this term, Jitsu. All right. However, these are the two most acceptable Romanized spellings, Jitsu or Jutsu. And they simply mean means, method, or technique. Now, do, as you can see, the kanji or the old Chinese character means the way or the path. It's basically a philosophical path that one takes in life through the practice of any chosen discipline. It's a path, it's a way. Bujitsu and Budo. So, Bujitsu simply means the martial method, while Budo simply means the martial path, or a philosophical path one takes in life through the practice of a martial discipline. That's Budo. Now, these are the main differences between Bujitsu and Budo. Bujitsu was developed and practiced before the Meiji Restoration. The Meiji Restoration began in 1868. The only goal of Bujitsu is to simply be able to kill or destroy one's enemy in battle for one slot called the daimyo. However, as for Budo, Budo was developed and practiced from the Meiji Restoration onwards. And there are multiple layers of goals for Budo. The most important of which will be spirituality, philosophy, ethics, mental development, and physical development. Bujitsu. Now, among all the weapons that the ancient Japanese warriors used, they preferred this, the top four. The most preferred one would be the bow and arrow, Yumi Toya, the bow and arrow, because they can attack an enemy from the greatest distance possible for their own safety. The second preferred one would be the spear or the yari, or the naginata, the halberd. Okay, within 2 or 3 meters away from the enemy, they can still keep a relatively safe distance. The third weapon of choice would be the tachi. Tachi simply means the grand blade. And the fourth weapon of choice would be the tanto, or the short blade, something like a dagger when they are in close range with the enemy. All right, so the most favorite weapons of choice for the warrior in the battlefield would be the bow and arrow. Now, the differences between battle swords and peacetime swords. On the left side, this is how a warrior or a bushi in battle would look like in armor. The kind of sword he'll be carrying would be the tachi, with the cutting edge of the tachi facing down, as you can see on the left-hand side. Whereas during peacetime, the swords used will be, there'll be two swords basically, one longer and one shorter one. The longer one will be called the ujigatana. The shorter one will be called the wakizashi on the right-hand side, if you can see. Right, but both uchigatana and wakizashi would be held facing with the cutting edge facing up instead. So these are the two main differences in holding or wielding the sword during battle and during peacetime. Common types of Bujitsu, as you can see on starting from the left, is Kenjitsu, which is sword fencing methods. Second would be Iai-jitsu, sword drawing methods. Naginata Jitsu, halberd methods. Jujitsu, or gentle or yielding methods, or Sojitsu, spear methods. We also have Aiki-jitsu, blended energy methods, or Kyujitsu, bow methods. These are only a few common types of Bujitsu. Common types of Budo, starting from the left, Kendo, sword fencing path. Iaido, sword drawing path. Naginata-do, halberd path. Judo, gentle or yielding path. Sodo, or Jukendo, spear path or the bayonet path. Aikido, blended energy path or the way of harmony. And Kyudo, the bow path or the way of the bow. Budo attire. Now, the most common Budo attire today is called the Budo-gi. As you can see, the kanji or the old Chinese character Budo-gi. The Budo-gi came into being only towards the end of the 1800s through the Judo founder, all right? Judo founder, his name is Professor Kano Jigoro. Professor Kano Jigoro was an academic also. He was a professor in a university. He was inspired by the uniform of the old Japanese firefighters. So from this inspiration, he designed and established the Budo-gi. Professor Kano made it white to represent Shoshin. Shoshin simply means the purity of heart and mind, or a beginner's heart in mind, please refer to my video on Shoshin if you want to find out more. As such, it was never an ancient attire. It started only towards the end of the 1800s. The Judo ranking system. Now, the Judo ranking system inspired many other Budo arts to follow the same system or similar system. Right, so let me explain to you the Judo ranking system. Professor Kano also established the modern Q-Dan ranking system for his Judo. Q, as you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, Q grade or Q belt simply means just colored belts that are below the Dan grade. Right, a beginner will start with a white belt. Okay, the white belt, the white belt will be 6Q. Right, and then when he progresses, you will progress to the 5th Q or the Gokyu, which will be the yellow belt, and then to the orange belt, the Yong Q, the 4th Q, Sun Q, the 3rd Q, the green belt, Ni Q, the blue belt, and finally 1st Q, the EQ. Right, these numbers will decrease as the rank increases. And then on the right hand side, once a person has completed his 1st Q or his EQ, next level would be the Dan grade. The first Dan level would be called Shodan or the beginning Dan. Second Dan would be Nidan. The third Dan would be Sandan, Yongdan, and the 5th Dan will be Godan. So from the 1st Dan, Shodan, then to Godan, the 5th Dan, the practitioner will be wearing a black belt. And from the 6th Dan to the 8th Dan, the Rook Dan to the Hach Dan will be wearing a red and white belt. And then the 9th Dan, Q Dan to the 10th Dan, Ju Dan, will be wearing a red belt, a totally red belt. So this is generally the Q and Dan ranking system. As I've said earlier, most Budo disciplines had followed this example, but the choices of colors chosen to represent the levels would vary from system to system. Misunderstanding of Budo. There are 3 major schools of thought among Budo's practitioners today regarding the goal of Budo. One school of thought is Budo must enable one to be effective on the street. That is, to be martially effective. The second school of thought would be Budo must enable one to be physically fit to win tournaments or to rise in the ranks. The third school of thought would be Budo must be able to be spiritual, philosophical, ethical, and mentally strong. So these are apparently 3 different schools of thoughts regarding the goals of Budo. All these 3 schools of thoughts are in fact correct. They are not wrong. They can be reconciled. All these 3 schools of thoughts can be reconciled, or the contradictions can be eliminated by simply prioritizing the goals of Budo. Budo has many goals. We just need to prioritize these goals. One way to view Budo. Now this slide just represents my personal opinion. It never intended to be an absolute truth, right? So one way to view Budo, all the goals of Budo are important, but importance still have priorities. In descending priorities, the goals of Budo, this is my opinion, it's not absolute, right? The most important is spiritual development. Second, philosophical development. Third, moral development. Fifth, mental development. Fourth, mental development. Fifth, physical development. And sixth, last but not least, martial development. Now, physical development and martial developments are still very important. That's why the study of and practice of Budo should be a continuous, lifelong process. Now, it's only natural for us to begin at the bottom upwards. That is from martial towards spiritual. This process will take years. The Budo learning process will take years and decades to pursue. But we will never, probably we will never reach mastery. But it's a lifelong process. Now, I would like to have a special mention about Okinawa. Okinawa is a very special case. Okinawa, as you can see, the kanji, or the old Chinese character, is actually a cluster of islands very far south of the main body of Japan. It was acquired by Japan only during the Meiji Restoration in the 1800s, quite late, until it went under, okay, after the Meiji Restoration, it went under the American occupation after World War II. And after World War II, it returned. After the American left, it returned to Japan only in 1953. So Okinawa is in fact so far away from the mainland of Japan that it is in fact closer to China and Taiwan. Right. Still on Okinawa. Before the Meiji Restoration in the 1800s, in 1800s, Okinawa was under the kingdom called the Ryukyu Kingdom. That is before the Meiji Restoration, with its own lineage of kings and royalties. Because it was so close to China and Taiwan, lots of trade took place in its history, including the fighting arts. Now, a form of Southern Chinese martial art was taught to the Ryukyu Islanders when the Chinese traders visited. Now, I do not wish to use the term Wushu, because the term Wushu was only created after China's Cultural Revolution in the 1900s. I also do not wish to use the word Kung Fu, because Kung Fu simply means skill. And it was a misunderstanding misunderstanding to the Western world, since it was used by the great Bruce Lee. So Wushu did not exist, the term Wushu did not exist at that time, and the word Kung Fu simply meant skills. Now, what kind of Southern Chinese martial art was taught? In fact, there was no name. The Chinese traders that taught the Ryukyu Islanders did not give a name to their art. So the Ryukyu Islanders simply called them Tangte. Tang simply means the Tang Chinese. Te means hand. So Tang Chinese hand, Tangte. And this is how the kanji of Tangte looks like, the Chinese character. Okay, when Ryukyu came under the Japanese rule during the Meiji Restoration in the 1800s, the Ryukyu Islanders wanted to give that Tangte a new Japanese pronunciation. Tang was pronounced as kara in standard Japanese. Hence, the Japanese term karate was adopted, but it still referred to the Chinese hand. Ryukyu was also renamed to Okinawa when Japanese rule took over during the Meiji Restoration. So Tangte became karate, still the Chinese hand, and Ryukyu became Okinawa during the Meiji Restoration. Excelling in empty hands. When Ryukyu became Okinawa during the Meiji Restoration, all weapons were banned in public. So the Okinawan extensively developed their empty hands techniques based on the weapons that they used to learn and practice, based on the same principles. From karate to karate. Now, what's the difference? Politically, the Okinawans had to try to distance their karate from the Chinese connection. However, kara still refers to the Chinese. So they had to find a way to remove kara from its name. And since their karate was now more empty hand than with weapons, and coincidentally, the Japanese kanji character fitted perfectly. It was also pronounced as kara. Thus, karate changed from the original karate, Chinese hand, to karate, empty hand, both with same pronunciation, but with different kanji, so different meaning. Okinawa to Japan. Also in the early 1900s, karate began making its way to the mainland Japan. Now, surprisingly, this was the very first time the Japanese martial artists saw kicks used effectively in combat. Kicking. Previously, the samurai or the bushi rarely used their kicks effectively because of the cumbersome hakama, their weapons, and all their armor. Okay, what is the hakama? Hakama is simply the skirt-like split pants, which the ancient Japanese warriors wore for horse riding, basically for horse riding. From karate to karate do. Now, when Japan regained control of Okinawa again after the American occupation in 1953, this is what happened. In order to encourage karate's popularity among the Japanese, karate was renamed as karate do. The do was added, and it turned into a competitive sport with set rules on three major areas: sparring, which is called kumite; solo set forms, which is called kata; and set forms analysis or set forms application, which is called kata bunkai. However, upon the retirement of competitions, practitioners are encouraged to continue their lifelong pursuit for his mental, moral, philosophical, and hopefully, eventually, spiritual development. Now, these are a few common types of Budo. Let's go back again to update. I've added one more, Karate Do. Right? So includes Karate Do as an empty hand path, or the way of the empty hand. Surprisingly, there's in fact a third category of Japanese martial disciplines. The first two I've introduced, and Budo. Now there's a third one called Kobudo. Ko simply means old or ancient or traditional, and Budo means martial. Do means the path or the way. So it's simply old martial path. Kobudo. But isn't it an oxymoron? Ko means old, but do implies a new outlook, a new philosophy. No, it's not. So what is Kobudo then? It is simply learning and practicing the old ancient techniques, the old ancient way. But instead of having the goal of martial development, it is now replaced by preserving history and tradition. Okay, so instead of martial development, the goal is to replace it with preserving history and tradition. So all in all, what are the goals of Kobudo? In descending priorities. First, is still spiritual development as top. Then philosophical development. Then moral development. Then mental development. Then physical development. But now, instead of martial development, is replaced by preserving history and tradition. These are the goals of Kobudo. Right. In conclusion, the three main categories of Japanese martial disciplines: Bujitsu, techniques to kill and destroy the enemy; Budo, path to personal improvement and development; Kobudo, path to preserve traditions. With this, do you embrace the Japanese martial disciplines? If yes, which one?